have 5 offices across the world. We're about 300 people worldwide, of which about 2/3 are in Rotterdam, and therefore 2/3 of our projects are also in Europe, although we're working internationally. We are an office of about 45 nationalities, and we work very interdisciplinary in our manner, involving all disciplines in our creative process, usually as early as possible. Our office is very non-hierarchical, operating really as a studio, and our working sessions often reflect this quite obviously. And this process has resulted for us in a fairly good track record. This is the Dutch Embassy in Berlin in 2004, Seattle Library in the United States in 2005, and finally a concert hall in Porto, which we completed in 2006. One you may also be familiar with is the proposal for Cctv in Beijing, which is an interesting example because it actually, the competition came into our office at the same time as the competition for the new, what would replace the World Trade Towers in New York. And we actually chose to participate in Cctv for a number of reasons, partially due to the recognition that at the height of the Yes regime, when theories on urbanism, which no longer were very prevalent, had actually been replaced by sort of algorithms and mathematics, we found this to be really a pity. This is a proposal by McKinsey for what to do in Mumbai, replacing this sort of ideal urbanism of somebody like Le Corbusier. At the same time, architecture had largely really become a sort of bonfire of the vanities, in our opinion. A reverence for sort of architecture and architectural classics was replaced by actually sort of theme park type architecture, Bilbao and Denver being 2 prime examples. Although the architects themselves were often quite proud of their accomplishments and their achievements, even those not associated with architecture at all could actually see the ridiculous nature of where the profession was headed, I guess, in our opinion. So at a certain moment, it sort of seemed that recognition actually became inversely proportional to relevance in the architectural field. And we wanted to try and do something to both recognize but also potentially even reverse this. It had come to a point where money was thought to create taste, and cities like Abu Dhabi could literally buy culture. So they would lure institutions such as the Louvre or Yale to Abu Dhabi to create culture out of nothing, again, through these kind of icons and this almost theme park-like implementation. As these icons proliferated, one after another, they became totally unrecognizable, such that the landscape, essentially, icons became commonplace, actually. And you have to look very carefully to pick out even your own building at a certain moment. So sort of after the crash, on the heels of the crisis in 2008, we sort of felt we needed to look critically at our own ambitions and the way that we wanted to proceed with our own architecture, our commissions. So these are the projects prior to Cctv, and then these are after. And what I would like to do is actually show a selection of the projects that we've done since, all of which are either built or under construction, to sort of explain to you how our thinking and our critical process changed and where we're going as an office, where we've gone in a way. The shift in focus has been under the guidance of 6 partners. Our office is led by 6 partners, and they are also of various nationalities and disciplines. So we're really fortunate in that case. And I guess the move away from these icons and the iconography and towards simplicity began with a project in Dubai, which was never built, but I think is important to show you anyway, relevant in any case. It was in Dubai's Business Bay, and it was a mixed-use building, primarily actually a hotel. And we essentially conceived of it as a simple rectangle, which could actually rotate on its base. So no flare. It made quite a statement. It's 300 meters tall by 200 meters wide and a 21 meter slab depth. So essentially, along with it and along with the building in the landscape and in the context that it was in at the time, it was quite a difference from what we saw and what we had noticed. We invented sort of calling cards for this type of simplicity in the form of postal stamps, small manifestos, which maybe even though they seem a little bit gimmicky, are actually indicative of where our office has gone since then. The first project I wanted to show is a building in Shenzhen, which is in the Pearl River Delta in the south of China. And it actually houses the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. It was completed at the end of last year. It's a building of 40,000 square meters, and it is situated along Shenzhen's actual main infrastructure artery, so it's quite an important part in the center of the city, in the CBD. Unlike the typical building of this nature, which has a podium resting at its base, we actually chose in this building to lift the podium above the ground. So the building itself, the tower itself, is 256 meters tall, but the podium is lifted 28 meters above the ground. And what happens within this, so that's the 28 meter distance, what happens within the podium is quite nice. It's the majority of the public functions, including the stock exchange's listing hall. So there's also a kind of lighting concept where it becomes red and almost glowing in the evening when there's a public function taking place, again, as a sort of billboard or a calling card for the building itself. The podium also features a really fantastic green roof, which is entirely public and can be accessed any time of day. And the public program there is also used quite fervently. On the subject of green roofs, we moved to the United States. This is a building we built in New York at Cornell University in Ithaca. And with sustainable solutions in mind, we designed this sort of seemingly simple box with a green roof as well, keeping in mind that sort of the box as modern architecture's typology par excellence. This box is actually not a freestanding box, as you would normally see, but it connects two buildings that were already situated in the landscape and on the campus of the Cornell's School for Planning. So the box itself acts as a connector and at the same time houses a large amount of studio space and space for students, and as well as crit space and flexible working space for the attendees. The nice thing is that the box is also lifted off the ground, so it keeps the figure ground of the existing campus intact. And in the meantime, as I said, offers quite a lot of working space. So this is the kind of cantilevered box rising off the ground. This is the working space, and then in the evening. The roof itself has 41 individual skylights, so offering really a lot of daylighting and a sustainable method of cooling for the building itself. We actually are no stranger to studio spaces, workspaces, flexible spaces, as we inhabit one ourselves in Rotterdam. But this is another organization that approached us to design something similar. This is actually G-Star, located here in Amsterdam, and they wanted to consolidate a lot of their functions into a single building. So this is situated along the A10 highway in a sort of almost post-industrial kind of part of the city. And essentially, it's a 27,000 square meter building that houses, as I said, the majority of their offices consolidated into a kind of central location for their brand. But what we conceived was, as you can see, this kind of ring and the creative node in the center surrounded by a band of offices. So this is the idea there, and what happens is that the front facade can actually move to resituate and reorganize the space as needed, depending on the function or the amount of space that they need to be able to use. The creative nucleus then is surrounded by the band of offices, and at certain moments they even have their large Hummers or their blimps that come in and are allowed to kind of be featured within this space, and sometimes they even feel quite small. but it allows also a flexible and open working space for their employees, which they enjoy daily. The large cantilevering glass box is the space that they use for their display and showrooms. So it also, again, is a sort of billboard or calling card also along the highway for the brand itself, which is quite interesting. Facades can actually be quite tricky when inserted, especially into a historical context or a case where you have a system of preservation. Such was the case working on Rothschild Bank, the headquarters for the Rothschilds in London. And the New Court building is essentially along Swithson Lane, and it's been in the Rothschild family for quite a long time. And they never did anything with it because there are two preserved views, one of a very important church and one down this lane, which you can see, which needed to be maintained in some way. So essentially, one of the things we did was to lift the ground floor so you can actually see clear underneath. And then integrated within the building was very important to the family also that they could use a lot of their antiques and a lot of their collections. So they wanted a sort of piece of modern architecture that didn't seem antiquated, but they also wanted their collections to be integrated in a sort of semi-seamless way. So we were sort of proudly able to do this, we felt. And the building itself also boasts a really fantastic view of London. So the space, again, on the top floor is quite flexible and can be reconfigured as needed or for people to use. On the subject of views, I guess, I wanted to show this project as well, which potentially many of you know. This is a building in Rotterdam that was completed at the end of last year. It was conceived as a vertical city. It is called De Rotterdam because this was the name of the original ship that docked in the harbor, and it's actually 3 towers, although it can appear as many as 6. The one on the far left is primarily hotel, the one in the center is primarily office, and the one on the right is primarily residential. The building itself, as I said, is 160,000 square meters in total, and it's now that it's complete is the largest building in the Netherlands. Interestingly, this project came into our office in 1997. It's in the harbor in Rotterdam and on the Wilhelmina Pier, and actually, the groundbreaking only finally happened 14 years later in 2009, and it was completed, as I said, at the end of last year, so it took almost 4 years to build. This is the approach from the Erasmus Bridge. I guess when presenting several buildings under construction or being built, you get used to cranes. But please ignore if you can. This is a building that is under construction in Qatar for the Qatar Foundation headquarters, which is an initiative of the Qatar royal family and is situated in the center of Education City. It's also a quite simple cube, which is situated on a site on the north part of this site with a research center on the south part that is also done by us. It is, again, a kind of return to simplicity in the face of this number of icons, number of iconic architecture as it stands. This is very important component of it is that the Sheikha's personal office resides within. So actually what you see in the building is the slit between the lower part and the upper part, and the upper part denotes her offices and her quarters, which this is the interior. But again, a return to simplicity. It's quite an impressive building and will be very centrally located near the Education City Central Library. More cubes. This is the former Commonwealth Institute in London. It's located in Kensington and Chelsea, and the building in the center of this image is the actual formal Commonwealth Institute, which will be taken over by the Design Museum. So the developer for this project wanted to have a proposal for a residential program which could be on the same site, which would complement but not distract somehow from this building. So again, we came with a simple cube. There are 3 residential buildings, the largest being 8 stories. And then some at various points, some of the apartments sort of pop out to allow for views or for more scenic, let's say, approach. And it's under construction now, and what you do see is that it is quite complementary to the Design Museum, which is quite an old and very impressive structure in and of itself. So that's quite exciting for us. The last project that I want to show is under construction in Rotterdam. It's the Stadskantoor, or the City Hall building, and it is a mixed use, first and foremost to house the City Hall functions and to consolidate many of the City Hall functions into a single space, but also has a certain amount of commercial and residential program as well. It's again a situation where we are putting a building in a very, very historic part of the city, and therefore, although it of course is a kind of contemporary building itself, it needs to integrate potentially as seamlessly as possible. The simplicity in this building is not just in the look or the way that it will manifest, but actually in the structure itself. So the building is made up of a series of structural elements called a Vierendeel frame. And essentially what happens is these frames all piece together in a similar fashion to create these pixels. And there is a maximum of a 6-bay free span and a 3-bay cantilever. So you have different moments depending on views, daylighting, all of these types of factors which determined actually how the ultimate configuration would manifest. And essentially what happens is with the simplicity of this structure, you can eventually, if the building runs its course of life, you can actually take it apart almost as easily as you put it together. As I said, it's under construction now and it's going up quite fast. So if you want to go see it, if you happen to be in Rotterdam, let us know. It's pretty exciting. And it's slated to be completed in 2015. So I hope this work has just given you a little taste of what we do and sort of explained how, in the face of architecture today, how our approach has changed and how you can see it through the buildings we're realizing now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 1 or 2 questions.
Sure.
What is the biggest dilemma for people like you at the moment when we talk about new buildings in Holland?
I think the biggest dilemma is that it's really difficult to design a building anymore in absentia. So a building doesn't happen on a clean slate with no context and no exterior influence. We try and sort of face that through, as I said, a very interdisciplinary approach and involving multiple disciplines early on in the design process. And then it becomes a fight to actually get it realized. Yeah. So De Rotterdam is a very good example where, as I said, that was in our office for 14 years. And many of those 14 years were spent trying to execute our original vision. So yeah. I think that can be very complicated, but it's also very rewarding in the case that it pans out.
Though not everything will completely succeed as much as you would like to. It's like personal life.
Yeah.
What is the situation of which your bureau learned?
Well, there's been many situations. This is a fun presentation for me because I told about 8 or 10 buildings that we've actually built. For every project that we realize, there are 99 that come into our office that we don't realize.
Really?
So
we learn
you're not
every exaggerating?
day. I'm not. We did a calculation, I think, about a year ago, and it turns out it's usually 1 out of every 100. So we learn every day.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is it that you learn?
Well, I think we learn a lot about, as I said, recontextualizing things in the face of the complexity that we're dealing with as cities grow and as cities become larger and far more complex. It's not architecture or urbanism or engineers or economists that can deal with the city on their own anymore. You have to be really interdisciplinary in order to address such complex problems. So that's both a challenge and an exciting thing for us, because I think it does give architects a renewed relevance in a certain way, but it means you have to be a bit more prepared to accept those types of challenges and ready for them.
If you could change anything in the field you're working in, can you give me one or two examples of things that you would really change?
We often wish we had higher budgets.
Higher budgets. Well, I don't have that. I don't have the problem now.
No? Well, no. One or two things we could change. I think that I guess what I wish is, I think in the face of also the kind of economic climate, the last especially 5 years or so, I think architecture is seen as quite a luxury when actually it's a very important discipline in many ways, not because we know how to put a building together, but actually because of the way that we think. I think that can be very valuable. And I almost wish that architects would fight a bit harder to have a renewed relevance or have a renewed input into the scene, because I think there's a lot that we can bring to the table and we're often shy to do so.
Shy?
Yeah,
okay.
Can be.
You're not. One or two questions from the people over here.
How green do you concern your own office?
Sorry?
How green, how sustainable your office?
Yeah, we have in-house people that help us actually with this, as several of the projects that I showed have big sustainable components, such as, well, obviously the green roofs, but also we're looking into a lot of geothermal, passive cooling, a lot of these types of methods of sustainability. We've also, interestingly, done a lot of work on large-scale renewable energy planning and sustainable design in that context. So we've also looked at sustainability on a very, very macro scale, even to the scale of Europe as a whole, the continent, which, I could have done a whole presentation just about this. But it's nice because it's interesting to zoom way out and then zoom way back in. And we try and use those processes to inform each other. So our buildings have, as I said, micro sort of sustainable components. And then we have these larger projects that look at it at a larger level. And how can our small components factor into a larger goal, factor into a larger problem?
Any follow-up question?
Now, maybe on the office itself where you work.
Oh,
what do
our
you
office
in this
itself?
very small scale? Then?
No, we're not that sustainable, honestly. No, we work in a very traditional, kind of very generic office space. I think most people would be very surprised at our office.
Well, that's another thing that you'd have to change then. Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.